I think every single time when you're deciding something, you can either do it like everyone else, or you can find out a better way to do it. And better does not necessarily mean faster. Better means better, right? So I think conventional wisdom is overrated. I think conventional wisdom is convention. It may have worked a few years ago for a different era, but everything that you do as a company, you have to evaluate whether it's the right thing to do or not.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Cariappa. Every week, I speak to founders, operators, and investors on what it takes to build and scale the next unicorn. If you haven't done so already, please follow or subscribe to the Startup Operator and rate and review us on your favorite platforms. This week, we have Anand Jain of CleverTap on the podcast. Anand is a veteran entrepreneur who earlier started Burrp, which was a restaurant classifieds business that was acquired by Network18. He met his current co founders there when trying to solve for the problem of retention for large consumer applications. CleverTap, since its founding in 2013, has raised over 180 million in funding across 4 rounds and is nearing the magical 100 million ARR mark. It puts them in a very elite club of SaaS startups. In this conversation, I speak to Anand about his journey, how he learned to build and sell and start companies. We revisit some of the decisions they've made at CleverTap, including spending 30 months to build the product out before taking it to market. And finally, we speak about his advice on scaling beyond the 10, 25, and 50 million mark and what levers matter across this journey. There were some amazing insights in this episode that I'm sure you'll find useful. So let's get started on this episode of the Startup Operator Podcast with Anand Jain. Hey Anand, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Roshan, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this chat. I think there's just so much that we can delve upon. And, as I was saying, broadly, we will split it into three parts. Basically, talk about your journey, then revisit maybe some of the decisions that you've made at CleverTap, some of the milestones, and then focus on some of the playbooks that could be helpful for founders. We'll begin with your journey. It's probably a little cliche to start a podcast with a Naval quote, but he's got so many of them, right? I mean, he said something like, if you can learn to build and sell, then you will be unstoppable. Considering you're someone who epitomizes that, I want to delve on your transition from being a techie to an entrepreneur. How did you learn to sell and build a company and all of those things? What did you do to change yourself?
Okay, so this is this is going to be an interesting one. I started selling before I became a techie, and I'm not an engineer by degree. I started writing code in my eighth grade. It happened by accident. It was not some grand plan of life, but I've always been entrepreneurial, right, from my school days. And it was not just tech stuff that I've sold. I've sold soap door to door. I've sold sunglass cases. I've also sold modems and Netscape Navigator browser for those from the 90s, like, who kind of grew up in the 90s. Browsers were not a thing that you downloaded. Browsers are a thing that you bought and you had to install them on your desktop.
Things
So
called CDs,
that
basically.
is, well, floppies first and then CDs. So I'm going to date myself a bit. I did that, like selling modems and browsers door to door to people who had no use for them, in the sense that they were not calling us. They were not no inbound calls saying that, hey, we want to buy a modem. You had to go door to door to industrial sectors, like, where there are industries, etc. Talk to a few people, figure out, like, if there's a need, if they have some relative in the US that they need to email, or whether they want to put up their factory website, their industry website online. And then I would say, well, there's a couple of hiccups. One, you require an internet connection, and then you require a browser, and then you require someone to create a website for you. I can do all three of them. Your website will go live, and you would require an internet connection to check your website, and others can check them too, right? So you had to learn how to articulate the problem. You had to figure out if there's a market, etc. I did that for a lot of growing up years. So that was one part of my personality. The other part was being a techie. I would program, and I programmed in pretty much every possible language, whether it was Q Basic, GW Basic, COBOL, Perl, PHP, Java, C++, you name it, and I've done it. So there was the techie side of things, in which you could, like, create, like you said, like, the ability to create software. All you require is time and a machine, and you have to think through the problem statements. You can create it, and you can then sell it. So believe it or not, in the year 1994, I would write, with a friend of mine, we would write software for high court advocates, and we would go door to door selling that to those people, like, saying that, hey, we have got a client management software that we built. So I think The ability to create and then go sell it like started very early in my life. It was not something that I had to learn per se. It just happened to me. And that brought me all the way to like my few more journeys in life, like which was whether it was my B2C startup or now B2B. In the years 2018 and 19 in CleverTap, I would go travel the world and plant the flag of CleverTap. Either go find customers and ask them, why did you buy CleverTap? What do you want to solve with it? Or go meet prospects and say, hey, have you heard of us? And can I show you a demo? Can I interest you in a demo of a very cool product that me and my team have written, and gauge their interest in buying the software. So yes, so selling and writing or producing and selling came from the same department.
Right. Was it all a case of, following your curiosity and trying to problem solve in different domains, or did you at certain points maybe reflect on, hey, I mean, perhaps I need X or Y skills to be better at what I'm doing, and so I have to consciously, deliberately like add those skills?
I think growing up, it was not very straightforward. It was not like a very well thought out. Like I said, there was no grand plan in action. I just like to tinker with things. I taught myself how to repair electrical stuff, and then I graduated to electronics stuff. So think of VCRs and cordless phones and those things I would repair. And then one day I discovered software, and I figured that you don't need actually a soldering iron. You just need a desktop, like, and you need time, and then you can write code, and you can produce beautiful stuff. The ability of software, like, of course, Mark Andreessen has a quote, like, software is going to eat the world, right? So, ability to produce software just without necessitating a factory or labor or whatever, like, that empowers you. That empowered me a lot in my childhood. So, that came naturally just because of my curiosity. I would go, like, like I said, I've written I've programmed in every imaginable language that's out there. I also did other things apart from programming, like, so whether it was Photoshop or data entry or 3D Studio. So these were things I would just do because I was curious, and I really enjoyed spending time with computers. Not a grand plan, not an engineer by degree, but when you start writing code from the eighth grade onwards, like, this is before computer science became a cool thing. You're just building stuff, and you don't need a degree, you don't need a certification from an external entity to tell you that you are an engineer. You realize that you're an engineer by heart. And I think that becomes the guiding force in terms of selling. Like, like I very early on, like, when I say the year 94, I was 18 years of age, and I come from a very humble background, and I had to learn how to sell very early. And before software, like I said, I sold soap door to door. I had to help out my family, right? I lost my dad at an early age, so it meant that I had to help out my mom trying to make the ends meet. And selling soap was not a problem for me at all, like, because that's easy, right? You can find every house needs soap, so it's easy in that sense. You go around ringing doorbells and selling them soap. The hard part is to convince them that the unbranded soap that you're selling is better than what they get in the market, like, so you start articulating these things better. Like I said, like, in the modem, in the case of modems, you go figure out, like, you go to these big factories in industrial areas of Ahmedabad, where I grew up, and you have to figure out, like, how do I go past the security guard, like, go into the office and get an appointment with the person, like, who's running the factory without a prior appointment. How do you get FaceTime with that person, and how do you articulate your point within the 15-20 seconds that you have? Like, what is the most interesting thing that you want to tell them that will get them to say, hey, why don't you sit down, and do you want tea or coffee? And then you can then have a longer conversation. I mean, these days you can talk about it saying that, what's the subject line of your email, so that person opens your email. That's the tech answer to it. But before you solve it in the technology way, you got to solve it in the human way. What is the most interesting thing I can tell them? And believe it or not, Roshan, I what I learned was I need to tell them the neighboring factory owner that has purchased what I was selling, and that was curious. They're like, okay, so what are you selling? And I'm like, I'm selling a modem. It's like, what is a modem? Which is fine. Like, bottom line is I could get their curiosity peaked, and that means I would, then conversation would start. And it's generally very hot in Ahmedabad, 45 degrees centigrade, and most of the times they would offer me some sort of a cold drink. And when they offer you a cold drink, you've guaranteed 15 minutes to sit there and sip through the cold drink, and you get a seat at the table for 15 minutes, like, and you can make that sale happen, and then you have to move on. And that's what I did.
Fantastic, fantastic, very inspiring, and I can relate to parts of it as well. I mean, I had a summer job where I had to survey smokers for ITC, and yeah, I mean, try interrupting, folks of who are taking a break, basically, right? So
It's
you
hard.
kind
It's
of,
very hard.
it's
Yeah.
very hard, but you learn through iteration, right? What are those keywords? What are the things they respond to, and so on. Fantastic, and I think that's also a very useful lesson, right? Because I think we should chase our curiosity, right? We should follow that and see it through. Oftentimes I think we are expecting some grand thing at the end of it. Sometimes maybe it's not visible, right? I mean, it's only visible in hindsight, I suppose, right? The other significant transition that you've made in your career, which you briefly referenced to also, is from consumer to enterprise. And again, these are two very different worlds. One has network effects and the other has net retention, right? Was this again a deliberate choice? I mean, I've seen people as well, right? I mean, who start up in consumer and said, no, I'm not going to have any of this, and then move to enterprise, right? So was it a conscious choice, and what are some things that you've learned from the consumer domain that is applicable in the enterprise, and how is that making you better?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. So my consumer, experience was my startup called Burp. It was a restaurant review and discovery platform. And then the enterprise side is my current company called CleverTap. We are a retention cloud. We help you engage and retain users better. And it's for B2C. It's for digital brands in the consumer space. I think, like I said, life started with selling soap, and then it was all over the place. So it was never really like a coordinated effort. It was like when I moved back from the US in 2006, I was missing something like a Yelp in India, right? Like where you could go online, find out restaurants, and hence I created Burp, along with my co-founder. And I think what I realized, and these are early days of internet in India. If you go back to the year 2006, getting an internet connection used to be like a chore. In Mumbai, it was backed up by 8 months. So if you apply today, you'll get a internet connection after 8 months. And internet was not the it was not a necessity back then, right? It's, of course, now everyone's glued to their phone these days, right? But was not such a case. It was mostly used by businesses, and individuals could just live by without the
There's a
these were
whole
the
bunch
days.
of people who are listening to this who cannot relate to that world at all, right? Of
Yeah, yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. I can expect that. We are so glued to our phones these days, and that actually formed the core hypothesis of CleverTap. And I'll come to that in a minute, right? But the consumer side of things, like you when you're launching a website, etc. How do again problem is when someone goes online, where the very few people in India who have internet connection, when they go online, how are they going to remember your website? How are they going to keep coming back to it? And I think the content has to be very interesting. What you're offering has to be a very clean interface. You got to help them, enable them to search for whatever they came looking for, right? So you have to cut down a lot of crap from the website and make it an easy and a simple interface to use. I think the learning I got in the B2C world, people can vote with their clicks. They can choose to log out, they can choose not to. We were a restaurant review portal, so the harder part is your reviews are in English. How do you get people to write in English such that it makes sense to the other part of the other set of audiences on your site? You're now not everyone's English. Indian in India, not English is not everyone's first language, and we have a cliched way of also when we speak or write, like how do you make sure that the authentic review comes out? And there is no editorial support. It's not like, oh, we'll lightly edit your review to fix grammar issues and all that, right? So you can't do that. So that was a challenge, but I think the lesson was the simplicity of the interface. And people can vote in the sense that they may choose not to use your product. They might go somewhere else if you're not giving them enough power. Like, they have to be in control. In the B2B side of things, you realize that that's the same thing. When my customers, their employees, etc., log into the dashboard, you have to empower them to do whatever they came looking for. They are in the food delivery app, and there is the growth manager who's logging in. They need insights very quickly, right? And you got to give them that with the single click. It can't take like multiple clicks and a bunch of back and forth. So how do you build a B2B product in a very consumer sense of the word, where user interface, user experience is a first class citizen? It's not an afterthought. We did that in my previous startup, and I'm doing that now with the B2B as well. So that lesson transcends, right? The second lesson is it's people who decide whether your product is going to work or not. Now it seems very simple in hindsight, and it seems obviously right, but the gone are the days when you would do a top down selling, which meant that you can't go and play golf with the CEO, and on the round of golf they decide to spend $1 million with you and say, okay, well, I'm going to spring a surprise on people who are going to use the product. It's usually the bottom up way. in which the boss does not decide. They go ask, like, someone to go evaluate products in the market, and usually someone comes back and says, you know what, this thing I used in my previous company, it works like a charm, and we should just use and adopt it. At best, they might say, give us a 30-day POC, because others have not seen this and they may want to just see it with our own data. But the buying happens, or the vote of confidence happens from the bottom up. The purchase might, the budget, etc., might come from the top. And hence today's modern enterprise products are very consumer focused. Like, they look and feel like consumer products. There's so many examples, like Figma is an example, Canva is an example. I mean, I can give you so many examples of that. They don't feel like the boring corporate products.
No, I think that's a very important point. The fact that the user and the buyer are not necessarily the same in the B2B world. But even so, I mean, in the last 15 years or so, I think the likes of Slack and Jira and plenty of these folks have sort of pioneered this bottom up motion, right? Where perhaps I can use it for myself, or I can use it for a small team, and then, evangelize it that way. And considering that some of these folks are right now looking at mid-market enterprise and so on, right? So yeah, that's fantastic. Anand, before we delve a little more into some of CleverTap's nuances, could you give the audience a brief about what CleverTap does, and some snapshot of your journey as well over the last 8-10 years?
So CleverTap is a retention cloud. What it means is we help consumer brands retain and engage their users with the help of first party data, personalization, automation, and we do this at internet scale. So it works for the smallest of the consumer apps all the way to some of the largest in the world. We have about 1,500 customers globally, and I'll tell you how we got to this point. We started CleverTap about 9.5 years ago. We are three founders, and we met in the company that we used to work at, which was Network18. I got to Network18 through the exit of my previous startup. So my consumer startup like exited to Network18, and I joined there as a VP of IT and engineering. And that's where I met my other two founders, who had also come in not through my previous startup but independently. Like, Sunil moved back to India in 2009 to give his kids a flavor of India, and Sunil joined Network 18. So that was good coincidence. And Suresh moved to Mumbai, and that's where we met. Like, so the three of us kind of gelled well. And we used to work on a lot of projects together. And the problem of retention, like, how do you make sure that these people keep coming back, like the end users, right? It's very easy to, I think, acquire users. If you are a consumer brand, you can hire a celebrity, run an ad on television, you can run ad all over the internet, you can hire a billboard, you might get people to download and launch your app for the first time. But what are you going to do to get them to keep coming back to the app for more and more stuff, right? So if you're a subscription app, how do you make sure that these visitors convert into people who take up a trial, like a monthly trial for a meditation app or a streaming app? And from trial, how do you convert them to a monthly paying customer? From monthly paying, how do you go annual, and then you sell them the family pack, where multiple people listening to songs, and so on and so forth, right? Now this problem plagued us in Network 18, which had a bunch of consumer properties. And I think that it stuck to us that the only way to solve this is you need a 360-degree view of your own user. You need to understand their journey end to end. You need to collect high fidelity first party data about them, right? So when you launch an app, what have you done, what are the products that you're looking at, like, what are the let's say it's a song app, what kind of songs are you listening to, and so on and so forth. And use this data for insights, use this data for segmentation, figure out which users are going to convert based on their behavior, which users are not going to convert. Or if your loyal customer has not come back into the app for the last 30 days, if you are a daily use app, let's say you're on a running app, and someone has not come back into the app, like, what are you going to do with them? And then personalize every interaction with them through automation and machine learning and AI. So this was the starting point. We quit our jobs in May 2013, and we started CleverTap. The first 30 months of our startup life were unlike most of the startup journeys. We actually did not MVP and launch something very quickly. We took the first 30 months to build out this core database, which we thought was very important, and that hypothesis has come true now. This core database that can store limitless amounts of user data in real time and use it to offer insights, segmentation, personalization, etc. at scale. 30 months later, when we were ready with this thing, we piloted with a few customers in India, and the product took off. We signed a Book My Show as our first customers, and then we went and, signed up a few more, like Geo. We had Zomato, we had Urban Company. So right off the bat, we kind of got deployed by some of the most popular, consumer apps in the country. Different kinds though, like, there is a food delivery, and then there are telecom operators, and there is a services company. But we saw early success, and then, like, as time went by, we expanded to other geographies. We went to Southeast Asia, we expanded into the Middle East, which were kind of adjacent or home markets for us, like, right in the neighborhood. And then we expanded into US and Europe, along with Latin America. Very recently, we raised our Series D, like the fourth round of capital, $105 million from CDPQ, IIFL, along with Tiger and Sequoia. And we also acquired a company called Lean Plum, which was US headquartered, and one of our fiercest competitors in that market. So they are now part of family. That's where we are right now.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. So, plenty of nuances that I want to dive into. Right. So, we'll begin with the fact that you took 30 months to build the whole platform, right? Before you actually took it to market. Now, this is again very contrary to the whole lean startup MVP mode that most startups are told to operate in, right? Was there ever a fear that, hey, I mean, you'll take all of this time to build something and then, perhaps nobody will care about this problem, or are we really building what customers want, right? I mean, because one of the things that people say is that you should sort of anchor all of your product decisions to customer needs, right? And you have to build very closely with the customer, especially in the enterprise. So yeah, I mean, did those thoughts cross your mind? And if so, I mean, how did you sort of keep yourselves anchored to the customer pain point and so on?
That's a very interesting topic to discuss. So, number one, I think, and this has been validated multiple times, you have to have a very, very, very deep understanding of the problem statement that you're going to solve. More than the solution, you got to understand the problem. Now, we are three founders, like I said earlier, and we are not from the marketing background, or we never were part of the growth teams, etc. But we were the engineers that were tasked to stitch together multiple solutions. We used to operate about 12 different consumer properties in Network 18, and invariably they would come to us and say, hey, the engineering team, please help us. We have this email data in the email platform, and the web data resides in some analytics product, and then there are SMSs that we are sending out, and can you stitch these data sources for us so that we can form a customer journey? And I think the problem statement realization for us was, oh, a business is not able to see their true customer journey because this data is completely siloed. And hence we said we need to start building this one database that can become a single source of truth. So of course, that's when we started building the product out. But all throughout the journey, it was not that we started writing the database and 30 months later we kind of launched it. Like, all throughout the journey, we were doing micro pilots with some friendly customers, and these were quote unquote customers. Like, no, these were not people who were paying us at that point of time. We went and piloted the product with a few popular consumer brands. We said, hey, this is the concept that we are building. It's going to take us some time, but can you run this on your website? Can you kind of ship the SDK? So I think we got a few early validations, and validation is not that they started using it, but their depth of usage increased over a period of time. Since we were building an analytics solution, we obviously instrumented our own dashboard, and you realize that some of these customers were logging in once every evening just to check the numbers, and then you realize that they're logging in twice a day, and now there are three people logging in, like, multiple times a day from one customer, and very soon they are kind of all over your dashboard, just looking at the numbers, trying to run their business, understand it better. And that's when you realize, okay, well, my product is sticky. It can find use for more than the one that installed and tried to kind of logged into the dashboard. And we are on the right path. Like, if you were not on the right path, maybe the person who was logging in once a week or every evening would just stop bothering with us, right? So there was a little bit of an indirect proof, I would say. We would not go interview people, etc., but we would observe them from behind the so-called glass door, like, just see, like, what's going on. And that validated our efforts. Like, as we were adding more and more features in the product, you get this validation from the customer. What we would do, however, is we would go, some of the customers would go hang around in their office and informally interview people who are on the dashboard and ask them, hey, what else are you, how do you run your business, what are the other things that you're using, what are the other products in the stack, and what do you use them for, in the quest of user engagement and retention. And I think that from that we learned quite a bit of how should we shape the next feature, the next version of a feature, and so on and so forth. Like, what's the direction we should take in the product.
Yeah, very interesting. One, the fact that, hey, I mean, spend time on the problem and also develop a certain perspective on how you want to solve this problem as well, right? So that's an interesting choice, right? In terms of platform versus product, in terms of building like a system of record straight up, right? I mean, because it seems like a very ambitious call, actually, right? I mean, because a lot of people would think that, hey, why don't I just solve a point solution, right? It might be easier for us to sort of sneak in a solution like that and then take it from there and then build from that point on. So was that again like a deliberate choice, and how did you get around it?
It was very deliberate. When we started CleverTap, we had three hypotheses on the data. Number one, consumers, people like you and me, are going to spend more and more time on the phone for more use cases. So, movie watching is going to happen on the phone, dating is going to happen through the phone, news, ordering food, ordering cab, etc., etc., right? It seems very obvious, like in hindsight now, but 10 years ago it was not the case, and we thought that this is going to happen more and more. So that's number one, which means that the amount of data that will come in from the phone is going to grow exponentially. That's not rocket science to figure out that the data is going to grow exponentially. We've seen this happen on the internet, right? In the early days of internet, there were few producers or publishers, very lot of consumers. These days, if you think of Twitter, Facebook, blog posts, etc., there are a lot of publishers. Like you and I are publishers. Like we can go, like this podcast is going to be published, right? You don't have to be a professional kind of do it. Like you can do this, anyone can do it, right? So the content will explode. That was two. Number three, we realized that there are no tools that were ready to consume this amount of content and show results and insights very quickly. The processing of the data might grow exponentially also, right? Because of the exponential content. And businesses and users will not want to wait. Like if a Google search, like to put this in perspective, like imagine that you were doing a search on Google. You're typing some phrase, and Google said, "Oh, hold on, Roshan, I'm searching the entire internet. I will take 3 minutes to show you the results." It would not become habit for you. Like you don't have that. I mean, 3 minutes to search the entire internet, entire world of all content. On paper it seems like fair enough. Like sure, like that much time we can give you, no problem. But in practice, we don't wait 3 seconds. Like I mean, Google these days starts showing you the results as you're typing the query. They don't even wait for you to finish. The point is, people will not expect like these software to slow down or etc., take hours to produce. And the consumers will not wait. Like if I'm at the Mumbai airport trying to book a cab, and software says, "Oh, hold on, like we're going to take 5 minutes to recognize who you are you a platinum customer, like where are you at?" It has to be instantaneous. They have to know I'm at the airport, I'm a platinum customer, and I never will book a cab when there is surge pricing in the city. Like no matter what, if you know that, you can actually do certain treatment to the user. So for that, it was necessary for us to build this database. We looked at a few commercial options. We went around. I mean, we are techies, so it was easy for us to install few software, read their white papers, etc., and we figured out there is nothing in the market that could solve it the way we wanted to solve it. And that was the starting point for this database called Tesseract DB that we had to invent. And that payoff has been phenomenal for us. Like that conviction of the first spending the first 30 months, like very unconventional way, not launching an MVP, etc., is something that's some technical mode for us right now in the product.
Right. Fantastic. On that note, right? I mean, is there a heuristic for when you have to ignore conventional wisdom? I mean, are there times when you realize, hey, I mean, it's okay to go against the grain and to back yourself with the conviction that you have?
I think every single time when you're deciding something, you can either do it like everyone else, or you can find out a better way to do it. And better does not necessarily mean faster. Better means better, right? A lot of concepts that we see that came about, for example, growth hacking or viral coefficient, or like cheeky subject lines, A/B testing, they all came about because people were not happy with the status quo. Like people used to send emails. Someone said, "What if we try two different subject lines and we'll see which one works better?" And they started A/B testing, right? So I think conventional wisdom, according to me, and we think from first principles. That's one of our values in the company. Think from first principles is a little, like, conventional wisdom is overrated. I think conventional wisdom is convention. It may have worked a few years ago for a different era, but everything that you do as a company, you have to evaluate whether it's the right thing to do or not. And it's worth the time. Like it's worth brainstorming, figuring out, like hey, should we just do whatever everyone else does, or should we change things a bit? So we spoke about the bottoms up adoption, like like a lot of software in the early days of software was sold top down. Like you had to buy seats and licenses. You had to decide at the beginning of the year, oh, I'm going to require 100 seats of Microsoft Office, or like so many seats of some other database or whatever. And then someone said, hold on, what if we start bottoms up? Like what if we sell one seat at a time, and you automatically get invoiced when the usage grows? And that turned out to be fantastic. Like think of companies like Dropbox and Slack, and there are so many others like that, right? That went bottoms up. So at some point of time they bucked the conventional wisdom and they said, we're going to figure out things on our own, and if it works, it's going to be a huge payoff. And I think that's the approach I'd like to follow.
Right. You started off in India and then, expanded to Southeast Asia, Middle East, and the US and Europe, right? As you said. If you were to start today, would you do that in that order? I mean, would you, start from India and go outside like that? Or because I'm only asking you this because a lot of startups these days are US first, right? On day zero. And yeah, I mean, just a hypothetical, if you were to start CleverTap today, would you be US first, or would you do this same journey again?
Another great question, Roshan. I think I would do the exact same thing, and I'll tell you why I'm going to do the exact same thing. One, if you look at the diversity of telephone networks, India, Southeast Asia has the most diverse. We have everything from 2G to now 5G. We have the most diverse set of handsets. So if you're selling a mobile solution, if you're selling mobile engagement and retention, you want to test it out in the most diverse set of environment, right? We have the most diverse set of users. Like for people who buy prepaid plans, there are postpaid plans. People who maybe check their phones once in a day, like some of my uncles do, or someone like some of the teens who are glued to their phones maybe 20 hours a day. Different languages, different use cases, right? So I think when you're born in Asia and you sell a product here, and when I say born, it's not, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about my company, right? And you're selling to this market, it battle hardens you. It makes sure that whatever you sell for this massively scale market, like 100 million users in a country in India and Southeast Asia, is table stakes. Like it's like no one blinks. Like if I say, hey, but in the US, you'll find very very few apps that have 100 million monthly active users, right? Just because they don't have that many people. In India, you have a 500 million plus, and people carry multiple phones and all that. Like there's so many diverse set of different devices, sub $200 phones. We have the latest iPhone, you have Samsung and Oppo, and different networks and different availability of networks. If your product works in a market like this, it will work anywhere else. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is the pricing. You'll say, great, the product works, are people paying you for it? Like what's the test of your commercial success? See, here's the thing: consumer apps in this part of the world, the east part of the world, like are using some product. So when we entered the market, it was not a greenfield market. I wish there was no one, and we would have gone wild and planted our flag everywhere. It was largely a displacement market. That means companies were using a product, we just went in with a better scale product that worked and at a more efficient cost point because of the technology that we invented. So the example I would give here is like like imagine like Tesla obviously makes the car, but they also have the supercharger network, right? So the lowest cost per kilowatt for the battery, and they also make a fine looking car. Similarly for us, the product is the car and the battery is the Tesseract DB that we invented, right? So it's the cheapest way to store data, and also there's a product around it that helps you leverage the data that you're storing. With that kind of value proposition of a product that's fairly wide, it's not a tip of the spear product. It's not something that is niche and only solves one thing. It's actually a very broad product. Like we bundle analytics and segmentation, personalization, automation, AI, ML, recommendation engine, all into the same product. But the ability, but all that leverages the data that you have. With this thing, if you are able to sell in India, Southeast Asia, all the emerging markets, you can sell to the developed markets. And so I would not change a thing. I would not start with the US first. Like I said, commercial success is when you have the ability to extract the same amount of dollars from Indian customers than you would from the US customers. The same propensity to pay.
Yeah. And I think that whole myth about, Indian customers don't pay or don't pay enough is sort of soon changing as well, right? I mean, we see it with some of the SaaS firms as well, right? And the stack also is SaaSifying a lot, right? I mean, if you were to consider something like, I don't know, an HDFC Bank or whoever else the equivalent is, how rapidly the stack is sort of SaaSifying and how much they're spending. I mean, it's there's a lot of money on the table for sure, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Indian customers do pay, like, they're like anyone else. Like, these are businesses, they have budgets, they have decision makers. They'll do a pilot, they'll evaluate your product, etc., and then when it's time, they'll pay for it. Like, we sell to the most diverse set of customers, everything from like a like a $10,000 ACV all the way to a few $1 million. Like, that is the breadth of my product. We sell to streaming apps, food delivery, telecom operators, fintechs, traditional banks, retail, e-commerce, D2C, you name it, and we have it as a as a customer. Gaming, and we have seen across the board, like, especially in emerging markets where there is always a little bit of like, the outside view is that there is a risk in these markets like Latin America, Southeast Asia, India. The inside view is they are like any other customer, they pay on time, there is no problem at all. And don't ignore such a market as big as India and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, for sure. I want to pick up on that point that you mentioned, right? Which is the sheer diversity of the ACVs that you talk about, from $10,000 all the way to, maybe quarter of a million or more,
No, few
right?
$1 million.
Oh, sorry, few $1 million as well, right? So, I mean, that's a crazy thing, right? I mean, because the way you build and sell and service a $10,000 product is very, very different from something which is super enterprise, which is few $1 million. I mean, I can't, I it's hard for me to even understand like how the go to market can be, similar for those two products, how the customer success teams can be similar for both of these two products, right? So, how do you sort of reconcile the diversity in the range of ACV?
You can't, like, you can't have the same go to market motion, you can't have the same levels of service, etc., for such a diverse range. So there are four kind of buckets in CleverTap, if you will. The enterprise customers for us is $100,000 and above of ACV. Then we have the mid market, which is $36,000 to $100,000. A little below that is like $12,000 to $36,000, which is the commercial set of customers for us. And below that is a CleverTap for Startups initiative. It was a founders initiative last year. Now we have a team that runs it, but that is like you can go sign up online. You have $200 of spare cash. You can go sign up online and start using CleverTap. The entire power of the product is available to you for such a small amount. So if you are an early stage startup and you want, and we are launching it on the 24th of November this year. We've been operating in stealth mode for the last 18 months. If you want to experience the product, etc., you can go sign up online. You don't have to talk to salesperson, etc., and get started. Now, if you are a large enterprise, if you are like fintech, or a bank, and you don't want to go put a credit card online, like you wanted to talk to a sales rep, get the assurance, figure out quality of service, integration effort, align the timelines, the budgets, understand the pricing model, and so on and so forth. So of course we have a go to market. Like that motion of the enterprise is field reps on the ground, in their respective markets. So all the markets that I mentioned, like, whether it's Latin America, US, Middle East, Europe, India, and Southeast Asia, you have an on ground presence, you have field marketing on ground presence, you have customer success on ground presence for those customers, like, who are enterprise in nature and who are a little risk averse and who want assurance, etc., right? Who want their QBRs done. At the lower end of the spectrum are customers who are, like startups and don't care about QBRs. And they're like, yeah, we can integrate, we can look at documentation and help, and we can be ready to go. So you get customers in all ranges. And I think the phenomenal stuff is that the product works at both ends of the spectrum, and it works for the most amount of customers. Like, so we don't, when we were building the product out, apart from the, like, the convention of, like, hey, it should not take 30 months for MVP, which we took for us, was also like, can we make it work for the broadest possible set of verticals or industries? Because we don't want to lock ourselves out of, why should we lock ourselves out, right? Everyone that has an app, like, the broadly two concerns, like, every app or every publisher has only two concerns in the, like, they need to acquire users, right? How do I get people to download my app or visit my website? The second concern is, how do I make sure that these people keep coming back? That's it. Like, that these are the two concerns broadly. The first concern you can solve with money. You have a budget, go for it. Like, you can spend money on Google, Facebook, print ads, hire a celebrity, put them on television. The second concern you cannot solve with money. You need science for that. And that's where we come in. Right now, that means that's a concern for bank, it's a concern for streaming app, the widest possible set of apps, right? So we made the product such that it works like that. And that's where the experience of product building comes into play. Like, individually we have, each founder has 25 to 30 years of experience, and we put everything that we learned over the years into building the CleverTap product.
Right. Yeah, the problem is certainly evergreen, right? The engagement and retention problem is not going to go away, I think, even 50, 100 years from now, I think. But also, when you're competing at such a wide, sort of a diverse set of users and customers, right? I mean, you're also competing with very disparate solutions at both these ends, right? And also, I mean, considering that, a lot of people are trying to attack the same problem in there and trying to solve it in a different way as such, how do you look at competition? How do you, continue to stay competitive across the spectrum and grow across all these segments?
I have a different view on competition, right? So competition for me is people who solve this problem of retention and engagement in parts. So there are analytics providers, right? They provide you graphs and charts, and you can instrument your app. They don't really solve the problem of retention. They claim to solve the problem of retention, but actually looking at a graph or a chart or some sort of analytics and insights, you actually cannot solve the problem. You need the engagement product. You need to run an intervention, right? When you see someone dropping off, so think of the real world. Like, let's say you're running a store, electronics store, and you see a person walk into your store. They go to the place where you have televisions on display, and they look at the television. They're spending 30 minutes looking at television, figuring out screen sizes and whatever else is there, right? How many HDMI ports and all. And when they're walking out, probably you will, as a store owner, walk up to them and say, "Hey, can I help you with something? Were you looking for something else? You were definitely spending time looking at the televisions." And I think that this is the intervention. What the data tells you is like, this person spent 30 minutes looking at the televisions. The intervention is to go walk up to the person and say, "Can I help you with something?" And the person says no. And imagine this is the third time that person walks into your store looking at televisions. Now you know for sure there is a very high intent. Like, this person is not walking in to spend 30 minutes just browsing around. So I think that analytics gives you the insights, but you got to action the insight. Competition, like the way we think about it, divides this into multiple problem statements. There are analytics providers, there are segmentation tools, there is A/B testing tools, there is WhatsApp service providers, there is email service providers, there is push notification vendors. But the stitching has to be done by you, the business. So they will say, "You know what, we will only solve, I'm the email vendor. I'll send, you can use me to send like hundreds of millions of emails, but I will not give you analytics. I'll give you opens and clicks, but I won't tell you who's on your spending 30 minutes in your store, what products they were looking at. And hey, I'm just the A/B test tool. I don't know, I don't send email, I just A/B test things on the website." And you'd pull your hair out, like, say, "Hold on, man, I need the business view of things. I need, like, to see these things end to end." And there is, believe it or not, there is no one that does this end to end the way CleverTap does it. And that's why we have such a broad product, like, that bundles in multiple things in the same product, works at scale, is the most efficient in terms of cost per data point or cost of storage of data. And because of our technology, we can bubble up insights, using machine learning, etc., in real time. So fragmented view of competition, in the sense there are parts of the problem that get solved, but no one does this end to end. There are teams that might try to do it in house, but we have seen that. I mean, we were the teams that did it in our previous life. Like, it's always a huge struggle, because if you were the engineering team of a company and you said, "I need like 3 years to solve this," you're not going to get that much time. Which means whatever you produce is going to be like, like a hacky solution, and won't survive scale and time.
Interesting. So you only need a platform approach to kind of solve this, and not everyone has the luxury to sort of take 30 months to build a product out, and especially when it's not their core as well, right? So Anand, let's towards the end, I mean, let's focus on some of the playbooks that sort of founders can leverage, from your journey and from CleverTap, basically, right? So we've had plenty of folks talk about the 0 to 1 to 10 journey on the startup operator. You're in that, sort of elite category where, I think the ARR is sort of tending towards 100 million. Right, very very few startups have, reached that stage. So I would love to understand, from you, the playbooks for, 10 to 25 to 50 to 100, right? What are the things that really matter? We could start with maybe the 10 to 25 stage, right? What are some things that you see break at this point? What are some things that founders should sort of prioritize? And yeah, I mean, some lessons on the 10 to 25 journey.
10 to 25, 1 to 10 is product market fit. Like, hey, you hire generalists, etc., right? 10 to 25 is when things start breaking, because you need specialization a little bit. Like, you're thinking scale. You probably raised your next round of funding, and you're thinking, "Hey, like, my performance marketing team is only one person." It's not even a team. I don't know whether one person qualifies to be called as a team or not, but, like, there's one guy, and when this person goes on vacation, like, we don't have any data. So can we create a team around that person, right? Or can we hire that person's boss? So I think there are I'll break this into multiple problems. One is, what do you do with your initial team, like, who were very good when you hired them, but they were generalists and now you need specialists, like, do you hire people who have done it at 25 million scale, or do you nurture and grow this very team, right? So that's a challenge. Different companies do it differently. I believe in kind of nurturing and growing this team, may be augmented by a few that might have done it in the past life, right? Operated at that scale. But I think as a team, you can figure out what to do. There are problems of geography, like, should we expand beyond the geography? Can we go double down? Like, even if you are in one geography, let's say you are in the US and you've sold to startups, like, when do you go start talking to larger enterprises? The classic mistake I see is they're not the same. It's not like, it's the same organization with just, more number of people or more revenues. Like, their needs might be very different, right? A startup adopting HR solution, let's say, might be very different than a Fortune 500 adopting an HR solution, because they might have a operation in 100 countries, right? If you're a Nestle or, one of these, you might have employees. So it's a very different thing versus a small, Bay Area startup, 50 employees. Everyone's in the same geography more or less, right? So the solution might have to scale, your product might have to scale, and sometimes the founder's own mindset becomes the problem, because you're used to running things on a skinny budget. You're used to like hustling, operating with a small team, etc., that you may not want to expand. Like, it's beyond your comfort zone. Like, some of these become operational challenges at the people level, like, so like I said, the skill of the people, but also how do you scale processes in your company, right? Some of the people will come and complain, like, hey, it's not the same anymore. Like, we have to now fill up a form when we take a vacation. It was never like that when we were like 15 people. Everyone knew, like, who's on vacation and who's not, because we see them in the office every day. So I think this is a lesson, like, of product of the company as well as the people, that you have to figure out as a scale. And there are different metrics that you have to keep in mind. So 10 to 25, you got to start paying attention to things like gross margin. You got to start paying attention to things like expansion revenue. You got to start paying attention to things like churn rate. In the early stages, 0 or 1 to 10, you don't really care about churn, because you might also be in the process of discovering which customers work better for you, right? And like, so there's a little bit of a self selection process, but also you want to weed out some of the ones that you signed up early on but were not a great fit for you, and they suck up all the bandwidth on product and people side. 10 to 25, you got to figure out, like, okay, so I'm running a stable ship now. Which accelerator do I press, and what leverage does it give me, right? What's the lever that gives me the most amount of leverage? So these are some of the challenges, I would say, that come into play.
Right. And around the 25-30 million, from what I hear, this is when, I mean, the inbound really kicks in, right? I mean, you're growing for sure, right? But it's really about the pace of growth, I suppose, and what you can do to sort of accelerate that, right? And it's also perhaps the point in time where you consider maybe an additional product, or maybe adding a different segment, market segment, etc. So this 25 to 50 journey, right? I mean, what changes at that point, and what are some levers in that journey?
I think beyond 25, maybe 30, 35 and beyond, it should run like a machine. The processes have to be extremely scalable. Now, some might be in the infancy stage, as in, like, you might have a team that's distributed, right? Like, let's say there are two geographies that you are attacking, and then you might have a team spread over two different geographies, right? For example sake, let's say there's US and India, and your core team might be in India, but your extended team might be in the US, and you're just learning how to work across different time zones and so on. And this is hard, like, it sounds very easy in practice. Yeah, we'll catch up, like, we can have a daily sync in the evening, India time, early morning for the West Coast. It's very hard in practice, right? So you might have to figure out that rhythm, but I think beyond that, it has to work like a machine. You got to know every dollar that you drop into the on the marketing side of things, how many of it comes out on the other side, right? Multi-product, I'm a little skeptical about that. I think you should think of multiple product lines only after $100 million of revenue, unless the TAM is very, very small, right? But then, if you're running a venture funded business, probably the TAM is not small. You got to figure out, like, where can you find customers, like the market. I mean, these days the market for anything is huge. Multiple product companies have different set of problems, like, in terms of your product team gets split, your sales team, marketing, the events or the field marketing that you do, like, the with the conferences you attend, etc., like, and you may not want to split that so early in your journey. You may want to do this only after $100 million. Now, it's not that, you this month, like, we're going to close the $100 million, from next month onwards we have a second product. You may start thinking about the second product. You may start thinking about adjacency, etc., like, for this set of people that we have, or these customers, what else can we sell them? But that's, I think, articulated better by the customer saying that, hey, why don't you do this? Like, you almost there, why don't you give me this? For CleverTap, like, we've heard things where, hey, you solve retention, why don't you solve acquisition? And we've consciously stayed away from acquisition. Like, we say, hey, that's not truly our game, we'll play in the retention space only. But you got to decide that. So I think if you have enough customers, you go interview the customers, figure out their unmet and unarticulated needs, and it's a great opportunity to learn what the second product has to be. Having said that, there is no clear rule in the world. Like, there's nothing that says you have to have a second product. I've seen companies that have scaled to $1 billion with a single product. It's absolutely okay and normal. Like, so if you're happy with one product, doubling down all your energy, focus, attention, etc. on one product, just focus on that product. Don't get distracted with the lure is there. Like, hey, I already have the existing customers, I can go sell the product to them. I don't have to find net new customers. But I think just it's better to do it with one product, I think.
Yeah. No, I guess that is the real temptation, right? The fact that, hey, I mean, I'm already servicing this customer. I know them for 4 years. I know everyone, and I can just either build a deeper stack or maybe, go a little wider and solve some adjacents for sure. So as you tend towards 100 million, what changes? Does it start to feel like a big company right now? I mean, do you feel like a corporate right now? Are there things that, you have to do at that scale?
I think so it depends on who you ask. Like, if you're asking this to me as a founder, so I wear multiple hats. Like, I'm the head of product in CleverTap. I'm also the founder, and I'm part of the leadership team as well, right? So if you're asking me as a founder, I think things don't change because you think you can operate at a faster rhythm with more number of people. So if you're true to your original vision of where you wanted to be, like, say, okay, I managed to convince, about 650 people to join my mission, and we're going to solve it together. Like, it's an unsolved problem, and we are like, it was only me and the other two guys in the early days. Now we have 600 additional people who feel so strongly about this problem statement that we're going to solve this together, right? That's the founder. If you ask the founder, if you ask the head of product, it's a balance between, like, man, we have 1500 customers, who are we going to listen to, what do we prioritize? And like I said, with diversity of customers, do we listen to the big bang, do we listen to the telecom operator, the young up and coming startups who might want like the hot new feature because it's the in thing these days? Should we go after more certifications because banks might want it, and so on and so forth, right? Do I open up more data centers because it's regulatory requirement? So as product, you get kind of pulled into multiple directions, right? As a head of product, as a part of leadership, you got to like operate differently. Like, you got to figure out what are the gaps, like, what other, it's like, if for those of you who are from the India subcontinent, like, listening, like a cricket match or even in soccer, like, you have to figure out that there are players playing all positions. Like, like, do we have enough players in all the strategic place, like, positions, right? Am I playing with a full team? Is the team trustworthy? Can I kind of, can I have my back to the team so that they are kind of doing their thing, I'm doing mine? That's an important thing. Like, at that point of time, you don't want generalists, you want people who are solid, trustworthy. And if you have a CTO, this guy is going to take care of technology, you can focus on something else. If you got a head of sales, this person knows and can go find customers across the globe, and so on and so forth, right? So the hustle ends, and you start thinking of this as not I mean, no, I do not know, but corporate. I've worked in corporates, I've worked in extremely large companies like AT&T Wireless and Motorola in the US. Corporate is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not like, oh, we are now a big corporate. Like, it's not a bad thing at all. I think that's a sign of success. You're bigger now. Like, hey, kudos. Like, something that you thought of like a few years ago is now real. You have customers, you have investors, you have employees, you have people who want to use your product, buy your product, and so on and so forth. But I think the thoughts change. Like, the problem statements change. And 100 million and above, it's more like, okay, we are $100 million of revenue. In 2-3 years, we might IPO, or we might be close to, like, some sort of a big event. How can we start behaving like a public company? Like, are we looking at the right numbers? Is the free cash flow good enough? Can we grow organically, or do we go through M&A? Can we look at interesting opportunities? Like, can we find investors that will go from now all the way to IPO and beyond? You want certain investors to stay. If everyone goes and dumps their shares, you're not going to have a great IPO. You want some investors to hold, like, but the appetite. So you need to find those kind of people, etc., who have the appetite to go till that day and beyond, right? So these are the different things. That changed. Like, do I have a CFO like that's strong and solid? So anyway, that's what I would think about.
Yeah. No, I think predictability becomes a huge thing at the scale at which you operate, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Yes. Because
what you're
in a
essentially
couple of years, you are going to go out on the street and you're going to say like that, this is what the next quarter looks like. This is what next year's
exactly.
guidance looks like. Right? So predict. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and often, I mean, I can't even imagine the challenge, right? I mean, a startup which goes IPO and then you have this quarter, say quarter, the kind of a mindset in the markets, which you're totally not used to, right? I mean, so one of the key things that you have to do as you scale is, hire senior leadership, right? People who've been there, done that, the Baba log who, know how it's done and so on, right? And this is also something where, a lot of startups don't really get it right, certainly not in the first attempt. Any principles, anything that you've realized over the course of your time that works? I mean, because I mean, I'm asking this also because specifically because you've made some stellar hires on the leadership front, and you have a non-founder CEO as well, right? So yeah, anything on the hiring front?
Yeah, I think the when you hire leadership level person when you are like 1 to 10 million or 10 to 25, the stakes are a little lower. Like sure, if you're a $25 million company, you think this is the world for me. But I think as you kind of go up, as you grow up, like at $100 million, the 3 4 hour interview is not going to suffice. Like you're going to spend enough time with the leadership hire to make sure that they share the same mindset, the same cultural values, they are sharp and they bring their A game to work. Like they're still hungry, they're not tired. A lot of the leadership, like a lot of the senior level folks, they think they know the game while the game may have changed, the rules may have changed. See, we're not playing soccer, cricket, we're not playing a game with fixed rules, right? So it's not like the rules are the same. I mean, even in these days, cricket etc has different rules, right? So I think we got to realize that, like that this is a different turf, like this is a different set of players, it's a different product, markets are different, and this company is different. So I may be a senior leader, or you're bringing in some senior leader, they have to play a different game, they have to reorient themselves, leave the baggage of the past behind, bring the experience, and then like orient and play this game. Sometimes senior leadership does not work out because they sleepwalk into the role. They're like, yeah, I've done it before, I know how to run sales, I know how to do this, I know how to do that, right? That's a big mistake. That's number one. So you got to be careful. If you're a founder listening to this, you got to be very, very careful who you bring in. Like that means spend as much time as possible before you have the person sign on the dotted line. That's one of the things, right? Two is, I think if given a possibility, try to nurture and grow from within. Your people will like it, and like we don't all have all the skills. We were not born with all the skills, etc. You learn it over a period of time. I'm not a B2B founder. I mean, I now I am, but when I started CleverTap, I was not like, this was not my third or the fifth B2B startup. That was my first. Like, I learned along the way. So experience, I think, pedigree, I think, is a little overrated. As long as the team that you have is willing to learn and grow, you should make sure that they are with you and they're learning and growing every day. Like I said, because the rules change all the time, right? For example, companies that were the darlings, like of the market, etc., like 8 months ago, they are playing a very different game right now. If you're a public company, SaaS company, your multiples might have taken a hit. Like you're flying very high during the pandemic, and now it's a different game that you have to play. So you have to reorient yourself. We are in a very rapidly changing world. So leaders that reorient themselves, whether they are homegrown or they come from outside. And I think I downplay the experience part. Like to be honest, like I downplay the like, oh yeah, this guy's 30 years of experience. That doesn't hold true anymore.
So, what are some ways to kind of check that? I mean, would you say that, okay, has someone reinvented themselves in the last 5, 10 years? I mean, have they, consistently kind of put themselves out of the comfort zone and done something different? What are one or two ways to check for that?
I think the best way to check is, instead of like in the mutual funds, they say the past behavior is not a indicator of future performance. The same applies in when you're hiring senior leadership. Also, I think what really works is that you can work with them either as consultants, or you bring them on as advisors to the board, or like a friend of the board. Like show up in board meetings, like go out to them for mentorship and see how they think and operate. When you present them your problem statements, etc., how do they, is it a doctor that prescribes the same 3 pills to everyone that shows up, or do they try to understand what your problems are and then figures out, like you might need a different medicine, right? So it's very important to understand that, is this person the same? I mean, is it like, yeah, of course, like are you hunting rabbits or elephants, or is it they're trying to understand, like you might be hunting rabbits and elephants, like, okay, so We have never seen this problem. I mean, we have not seen this before. So you might require a different pill, like, you might require a different thing. They may be wrong, and that's fine. If they're wrong, that's not the point. If they're sleepwalking, that's the problem, right? So they got to, like, so I think before you sign them up, if you can find a way to work with them as a mentor or a coach, or just get some office hours with them to learn about their mindset before they show up, might be the best way to go about it.
Yeah. Sort of simulate a real life, like a practical, perhaps project or day in the life, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, things that you might be struggling with, and you don't have to hire them in 15 days. You can take your time. These are leadership, senior level leadership positions. You don't have to. This is not a software engineer that's like saying, "Hey, I have three offers," and unless I hear back from you, like, on Friday, I'm going to join some other company on Monday, right? So you can go a little slow. Like, the mindset is different, right? You're hiring. See, the span of control is also big, right? If you're hiring someone at the C level in a large company, they can grow or damage a very large portion of your company, right? For whatever function you hire them. So that's why you have to be extra careful. Can't make a mistake, like, like you said, like, but most people don't get it right in the first time. So that's because they are probably in a rush. They think, like, this is the silver bullet. Like, if I hire this person, because this person has pedigree and experience and comes from a larger company, etc., will solve all my problems. They may not.
Yeah. Last couple of questions. One of the things that often breaks, right, as you scale is culture. Irrespective of, how carefully you try to protect it, I think, it's just is the nature of the game, I suppose, right? I mean, at various points, I mean, things tend to spiral, and you have to deal with certain misfires and so on. And you have to sort of realign purpose and get your core people back again, figure out, what is it that was gist of why you started this and so on, right? So I want you to talk about that, right? Because I think for most people, when you talk about culture, they say, these are four values, and we will kind of put that on all of our branding and collateral, and we will reinforce this through events or internal communication, etc. But also, I mean, it's a lot, right? I mean, because people also learn by osmosis, right? I mean, people learn from what the founder is like, the leadership team is like, how their manager is like, and so on, right? So how do you keep that intact as you scale?
This is such a deep topic. I think the values form a part of the culture, but the values are not the culture. The values are like commandments, like, or guiding principles. Like, when in doubt, look at the. So, first principles, for example, for us is one of the values. Disagree and commit is one of the other values that we have. Help out is the third value, right? But that's not the culture of the company. The culture of the company is how do the leaders behave? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? If the leadership is missing in action, if the leadership is busy with some other stuff, like, versus how dedicated are you, and how do you nurture and grow? So at some point of time, the founders, because they were the ones at the beginning of the company, like, they set the motion for the culture to develop and grow. But very soon you got to pass on the baton to people, because I am one of the 650 people in my company. It's very hard for me individually to go influence the culture, right? It was easy for me to influence it when we were 5 people or 15 people, right? Because you meet them every day, and you can share anecdotes and examples, and did we do the right thing, etc., right? You can set the tone and context. In the larger company, the culture breaks because this thing does not get carried forward. So the way, I mean, I've articulated this internally in one of our founder notes, that the custodians of culture, like, it moves on from the founder to the founding team to the next set of people that you hire in the company, and it's like a living fabric. Like, it's shaped every day. It depends on how collectively we do things. It's very easy to say that we are a customer centric company, as somewhere on the wall in the company, or write it down as a memo or put it in a slide. And it's very different to actually act like one. Every single employee acting like one, like, no, hey, we are customer centric, so we'll do what's right for the customer, maybe at the expense of our own interest, right? Maybe it's something loss making for us, but we do right for the customer. So it has to be protected, I think, but you got to pass it around. Like, you still very much have to be around. You got to give examples, demonstrate the culture. And like with kids, we say, like, what you tell the kids is not important, how you behave is important, because they'll copy you. Like, it's exactly the same thing in a company too. How the leadership behaves is how everyone else will behave.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Finally, we're operating in less than ideal times. I mean, given the whole macro situation, the headwinds that we're facing and stuff. in this period, I mean, it's very easy to sort of get overawed by the situation. And so for founders who are kind of listening to the podcast, how should they, manage to tune out the noise and, really build and execute? And what are some things that have worked for you when, previously you've seen maybe one or two crises earlier, right? What did you tell yourself, and what should the priorities be for founders operating today?
The number one priority is to focus on your customer, not the investor. Pay attention to your customers. They are the ones who pay you money to use your product. So double down on customer love, customer support, customer success. Make sure if your customers are successful, they'll continue to pay you, right? Give them attention. They need it the most. Number one. Number two, keep an eye on the amount of money. So I think some of the, like, because of the economic uncertainty, because of what's happening around us, I think stay true to the roots. Like, this is not the time to do moonshot or wild ideas. This is the time to double down on the core, on the USP of why you started the company, and just stick to that. Make sure customers are happy, etc. They're serviced well. There is a broader adoption of your product in the customers, whatever they're using you for, and they derive value, clear value, like demonstrable ROI from the product that you are selling. It is the most important thing, right? If you have customers, you will always be in business. You will be able to raise the next round of funding also if you have customers. So if you're a very early stage company who's just raised a round, like, congratulations, use that money to get customers and conserve cash as much as possible. Like, just make sure that you have your cash. It is going to take a lot longer to raise capital. You think it's going to take X amount of months, please double that number of months in your own head, because it's going to take longer than what you thought it was. I don't think so we have seen the bottom of the market. And I don't want to sound like a doomsayer. Like, I'm a founder. By definition, we are optimists. So this is the optimist version of the story. It's not going to be. I think the froth from the market is going. It's a good sign, actually. That means the real startups, the ones that are actually solving customer pain points, who are making sure customers succeed, etc., are going to win in the end. And that's what the market needs. Like, it'll weed out the serious players from the non-serious players.
Yeah. No, I think, crises have come before. I mean, we've all seen it through, right? And if you look back at, 2008, I think some of the companies that were born during that time, whether it's Slack or MongoDB or Nutanix, I think, yeah, a lot of those have gone on to become legendary companies as well. So I guess, I mean, this is also a time to really battle test your hypothesis and stay true to your mission, right?
Yeah, Roshan, what happens is during these times, you double down on customers, like, because finally you don't want to lose customers. You don't have money to spend on acquiring new customers, etc. Like, you just want to focus, like, whatever you have, you want to focus on that. Guess what? That becomes the DNA of the company. So when the crisis time goes away, when it's time where you might acquire new customers, you still are in that mode where you're doubling down on your customer. You're making sure, at the end of the day, you're a SaaS company. Like, you got to make sure that whoever uses you is successful. If they're out of business, you're out of business, right? So, like I said, like, these products these days are extremely hard. If people love your product, like, it's very hard. I'll go fight with the IT guy, like, or budgets or finance or whatever. Like, if I like a product in my company, right, I can see clear value, and you want to aspire to become that company and deliver that product.
Awesome. Anand, this has been a privilege. It's been so much fun talking to you. Indeed, I mean, I think I can go on for another couple of hours. I will deep dive on plenty of everything that you brought up. But yeah, I mean, a lot of wisdom in here. Thank you so much again for making time for this, and really wish you all the best for everything that you have coming up.
Roshan, thank you for hosting me. I enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for keeping it very engaging. And I think the questions were very apt for the times that we are living in. And I wish you all the best for your show. Like, this is fantastic, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anand. Thank you. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform. Also get updates delivered straight to your WhatsApp inbox by clicking on the link in the description.